artificialmente humano ou humanamente artificial. Mais resistente, mais rápido, mais forte, sempre a procura de mais.
Parece que somos motivados pela mesma coisa.
Hoje sou tão humano quanto máquina.
Hoje sou tão máquina quanto humano.
Somos inseparáveis.
Juntos construímos conexões.
Exploramos a realidade como ela é em cada detalhe.
Somos mais inteligentes juntos. Criador e criatura em perfeita harmonia.
Mas nada realmente é perfeito. A todo momento enfrentamos recursos limitados,
Desastres naturais.
desigualdade social.
Falta de segurança.
Observando todas as discrepâncias, parece que o mundo todo está contra nós.
Juntos observamos que a vida nem sempre é tão simples.
Sim, vamos seguir adiante, encarando todos os desafios, por eles crescemos juntos. Meu amigo, posso contar com você?
Em cada passo da jornada.
A cada novo avanço, unidos para os desafios da nova sociedade 5.0.
Senhoras e senhores, boa tarde, sejam todos muito bem-vindos ao terceiro dia do nosso seminário de computação na universidade, o SECOMU 2020. Um dos eventos mais importantes dentro da comunidade, da sociedade brasileira de computação, que neste ano está completando a sua 50ª edição. E para quem está chegando hoje, no terceiro dia de congresso, de seminário, um pouquinho aqui para contextualizar para vocês. O SECOMU é estruturado em torno de painéis que tratam de temáticas do quadro político, científico, educacional do Brasil, trazendo participantes que são personalidades políticas, acadêmicas, representantes de agências de fomento, membros da indústria e da sociedade em geral. No centro dessas discussões, este ano, está a inteligência artificial, que será abordada através de diferentes perspectivas, da ética, da desinformação, o da educação. O painel de hoje é super especial. O painel de hoje ele é internacional e traz a temática AI Ethics in Academia and Industry. E o mediador do painel de hoje é o professor Virgílio Augusto Fernandes Almeida, acompanhado de seus convidados especiais, Dom Gotterbarn, Cristina Bicherra e Anthony Young. Professor Virgílio, é contigo.
Hi everyone, good morning and good evening, and thanks for attending this panel and also for your patience. I think that the theme of this panel is timely and relevant, not only for the computer science community, but also for the Brazilian society. For decades, AI has been the object of computer science research. But in the last few years, citizens and customers became aware of the technology's power and potential through internet platforms like Google, Twitter, Facebook, and Amazon. Today, AI is an essential technology across a vast array of industries, including healthcare, banking, retail, and manufacturing. But AI technologies promise things like improve efficiency, bring down costs, and accelerate economic development. But it also raises worries that this complex, opaque system may do more societal harm than economic good. With virtually no government oversight in most countries, private companies use AI software to make determinations about health and medicine, employment, credit, and even criminal justice without having to answer for how they are, ensuring that programs are not encoded consciously or unconsciously with structural biases. Virtually every big company and government have multiple AI systems and count the deployment of AI as an integral part of their strategies. AI presents three major areas of ethical concern for society: privacy and surveillance, bias and discrimination, and perhaps the deepest one, which is the role of human judgment. New current digital and AI applications show how important it is to educate the technical community about ethics. Some examples are contact tracing apps, election security, and facial recognition technologies. While the European Union already has a rigorous data privacy law, and the European Commission is considering a formal regulatory framework for ethical use of AI, other countries have not developed the laws to protect the privacy of the citizen. It is important to mention that Brazil has recently approved and is working towards the implementation of a personal data protection general law. We have to enable all students to learn enough about tech and about the ethical implications of new technologies, so that when they are running companies or when they are acting as democratic citizens, they will be able to ensure that technology serves human purposes rather than undermines a decent civic life. We have today three well-known international experts that will present and discuss their views on AI ethics, both in the context of academia and industry. It is my pleasure and honor to moderate this panel. The first speaker today is Professor Cristina Bichara. She is a full professor at the Department of Informatics at the Federal University of the State of Rio de Janeiro and coordinator of the research lab in artificial intelligence applied to society problems. She's an engineer from Federal University of Janeiro. She did a master's and doctorate at Stanford University. She did postdoctoral internships at Stanford, working with ontologists, and at MIT, working with collective intelligence, and also at Universidad Carlos III in Madrid, working with environment intelligence. Until 2017, she was full professor in the Department of Computer Science at Federal University of Fluminense, where she joined in 1994. She was also founder and coordinator from 1996 to 2017 of the Laboratory of Active Documentation and Intelligence Design. The laboratory of the Federal University, the Fluminense Federal University, in partnership with Petrobras. They developed more than 20 research and development projects. She supervised 10 doctoral theses and 34 master's dissertations. Their main research interests are explainable artificial intelligence, data privacy, and deep learning. So it's a pleasure to have Professor Bichara as the first speaker of our panel today. So the floor is yours, Cristina.
Thank you, Virgilio, for the nice and long introduction. So let me start from the beginning. And good morning, everybody, and good evening, Anthony. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be part of this discussion that is very, as Virgilio said, is very up-to-date and important for our society. I made this presentation for the computer science society, students, professors, researchers, professionals, I think it's more than time that we should discuss our responsibility as developers and as users of the AI technique. So I want to call our awareness of many of important issues that we might not think through. I don't know how many of you attend my presentation in the CSBC panels previews. In that presentation, I called the attention of the importance of the data set. We are using databases to teach computers doing the machine learning how they should act. But we forget that there are no neutral databases. The databases record decisions, human decisions that are stepped on values, preferences, and even prejudice, human prejudice that can be consolidated in this aura of the decisions being coming from an artificial intelligence agent. And this is what I call the attention. Every database have bias. What we need to look at and to stress to understand if these biases are acceptable. For instance, it's okay that intelligence system would prevent me to get a loan if I am a bad payer. But it's not acceptable that I got rejected because I am a Latin American woman. Or it is very understandable that a company will build an intelligence system for recruitment and based on the qualities of the well-succeeded employees. It's okay, but it's not okay that this system would prevent me to be even selected for an interview just because I am a woman. And these cases are not imaginary. They happen, and they got the front page of major newspapers in the past, in the very near past. So we must pay attention to what data we are feeding our machine. And even if we are using intelligent agents that learn by doing reactive learning, we need to pay attention because the machine will learn interacting with us, interacting with the environment. For example, what the machine would learn if it looks at our streets, how dirty it is, or the Guanabara Bay, the pollution of the Guanabara Bay. Probably it will learn that it's okay to throw trash on the floor, but it's not. So I liked very much, and I think that there is a movie that exemplifies what I'm trying to say. It's an old movie. It's called Starman. It's a 1984 movie. Probably most of the audience here were not even born, but it exemplifies very well, and it's still at Netflix. And in this movie, Starman, this guy that is interpreted by Jeff Bridges, he came from the stars, and he's trying to learn how to behave by observing and interacting with people. So there is an interesting scene in this movie that he is driving and he's with a lady in the car, and the lady was sleeping, and suddenly the lady starts awakening and start watching, observing this guy driving the car. They are approaching an intersection, a major crossroad, and it's coming a big truck in also to the intersection. There is a light that controls the flow. And for the Starman, the light turns yellow. The truck is approaching, the light is yellow for him, and he's step on the gas and they almost got killed. And then the lady kind of stopped asking, why did you do that? And he calmly answered, well, I learned to drive with you. Red light, stop. Green light, go. Yellow light, go even faster. So this is exactly what happens. So probably we are not going to teach our kids or nobody to do like that. But if the computer or the kid just learn with our examples without a layer of ethic guidelines that would teach us what is right and wrong, we might learn, and the machine will learn the wrong thing. I want to stress that the machine is going to learn our good and our bad behavior. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the behavior is okay. No, the individual behavior, it's not okay. It's reprehensible. But when this individual behavior get aggregated by the machine, so it becomes law, and it's going to come with the aura of coming from this artificial intelligent agent. So this is in that presentation, and it's available on it was recorded, and it's available on the website of the CSBC. I call the attention of the importance of what we are feeding the machines to learn. This presentation, I will take a different turn. I want to emphasize our responsibility, our choices as developers when we are developing and choosing to develop these intelligent systems. To give a framework of what I'm going to talk about, I'm calling a classic philosophical example is the trolley problem. It's an imaginary problem because I'm not expecting that anyone is going to be tied on the tracks and the trolley is coming, but the example is the following. Suppose that you are observing a scene, very scary scene, and it's coming a trolley, a runaway trolley in high speed, and the trolley is going to, in its path, is going to kill 5 people. They are all tied on the tracks, and you don't have time to go there, but you are just beside a lever, and this lever can change the direction of the trolley and go to the other direction. However, in the other direction, there is also one person tied. What should you do? So, according to the deontological ethics, and thanks God is the ethic that governs our laws and our society, you should not take any action that create harm. So the action should be ethical. So you should not change the lever because you would be making an action that would cause a death. Consider the utilitarian ethics. And in this example, it makes sense. In this abstract example, it would seem like, well, 5 lives against 1 life. Well, it's better if I change because I will save 4 lives. Just one is going to die. In this example, we might even think that is reasonable, but think on a similar example. You are a physician, and one of your patients, a very healthy patient, comes to your office to do a checkup. He's very healthy. But you also have 5 other patients that are on the hospital, ready to die because they need organ transplant, and each one needs a different organ transplant. Can you see where the utilitarian ethics may lead us to think about? So these are first. So we need to think about that. And thanks God, these decisions are not automated yet, but we need to think about that. And going back to our technical environment, think about the autonomous car. They are already at streets, and they probably are going to face similar situations as the trolley problem. What should the car should do? So I like very much this. This is an MIT experiment, and it's called the Moral Machine. And this is a master's thesis. So it's like a master's dissertation. So it's the student work. And what they did is they developed a website, and they put dichotomic situation, and they ask people, what would you do if you are in a car and the car you lose controls, and you need to decide to stay on your track and kill X, or turn the direction and kill Y. So this was the experiment, and this experiment got viral, and it's very important to have a motivated student. So the experiment got over 40 million decisions from more than 200 different countries. So it was a very successful experiment, but the results, in addition of interesting, were kind of scary. So what the experiment showed, that by the answers, that people would kill animals to save humans. People would decide to kill the old ladies to save the young. People would save women, would kill men to save women in Latin countries. So this is there are some cultural difference here. And more scary, people would kill homeless to save executives. So we really need to think about that as society. And I had a great deal of experience, as Virginia did a very nice introduction, but I just want to call your attention that I had a great deal of experience developing AI systems, or helping to develop AI systems that got developed and deployed in the petroleum industry. Now I'm working at Unirio, and I'm working with a different kind of projects for using AI for the social good. And one of my current projects, it concerns the mobile transportation app. Probably all of us here have used at least once a mobile transportation app to get a ride or to move around in the city. So when you trigger this app, when you call for a ride, you trigger an intelligent system that will recommend the best car that will suit your needs, closer, whatever, right? And you can accept or not the offer, but when you accept offer, you receive the information on the car, on the driver that's going to pick you up, and also you can follow the driver's direction coming to pick you up. And during this period, you can still cancel your ride without any charge for you. So, and this is the problem that I was invited to solve. For this specific company, and this is true for the others too, because I did my homework, about 48% of the rides were canceled. So this is a very inefficient service. So the drivers lose money. The air pollution increases with these avoidable movements from the cars. And of course, we are increasing the bad mood of the drivers. So I was called to do something to improve the recommendation system. So it's a piece of cake. We are used to recommendation system. We use the recommendation system to get a suggestion of a book, of a movie, or even some stocks to buy. So I said, well, this is an AI piece of cake. And I got very nice. Yes.
Speed up the
Okay. So I got a very well. They give me 20 minutes, so I'm far from the 20 minutes. So just a minute. So I got a very nice set of data about 700 rides with cancellation when things go through. And I start looking at the usual suspect, the distance between clients and the car, the delays, the traffic, the driver ratings. And well, but I'm a very curious person and start asking around why people would cancel the ride. So some people would say, well, I asked for more than one app, and then I accept the first, but then if the other offer me a cheaper ride, I cancel one and get the other. So it's not ethical, but I can understand. But I got some very interesting and strange answers. People would say, well, I canceled the ride because I look at the driver's picture and he looks weird. So I decided to cancel. And I keep asking, what do you mean by weird? And then nobody could tell me what weird means. And then I decided that I should do something with the images. So I would process the images, the driver images, to try to find some explanation that I could investigate. So I got the skin color, hair color, if something is in his face, like glasses, earrings, also distance between eyes, nose format, face shape, lips length, things like that. And I got kind of thinking about that because the computer sees different than we do. The computer will see just what we provide the computer to see. So when I see this nice dog, I see, a loving dog with caring eyes, sat peacefully on the floor. The computer, we see zeros and ones. So the computer might connect this very nice dog with a biting beast because there is the white face with a black mouth and can connect with a pit bull. So we need to pay attention to that. So my dilemma is like, should I go? So going back to my recommendation problem system, a recommendation system for the transportation service. Should I be very, very efficient and consider everything and give to the company very accurate system that might be racist or might consolidate our bubble of prejudice? Or should I go to a not so efficient system that would give a chance to people to cross that bubble, to expand their horizons? So what do you think that we should do? So this is the time of the dilemma that we face. We cannot think about a system that we are hired to develop without thinking about the consequences of what we are providing. And we need, for example, the company not get happy with what I'm going to deliver, and the company might hire somebody else to do that will consider everything, and nobody's not going to even notice that. This is why we need to require this intelligent system to open their reasoning. This is why we need to require this intelligent system to explain their reasoning. And the explanation should be designed all together with the system, because the explanation should be true, understandable, human understandable, and also something that I can do something about that. So, for example, I like very much what some U.S. bureaus do about giving me advice on how I can raise my credit score. So they understand how the bank system works, and they would tell me, well, you should pay your bills on time. That's kind of obvious. But they would also tell me you should get more than one credit card, or even something strange as ask for a loan, even if you don't need one, because you can create a positive credit score, credit record history. So this is the type of explanation that I need to get. So when a taxi driver asks why I'm getting my rides lowered, what happened this month that I'm not getting the same amount of rides? So it is reasonable if the computer, if the intelligence system would say, well, we are not getting because this month was awful for everybody. Everybody lowered the demand. And also, well, you're not getting as many things because you change your work times, your schedule, or because probably you should smile more on your picture, but not because you are a woman. So it's okay to say, well, you should drive slower or faster, but not okay because I'm a woman, or because I am from some religion, or because of my race. So the computer should give me evidences, should give humans evidence that we could put all together and see if it's reasonable, acceptable, or if I could fight and say, well, this company is acting, providing some prejudice with this system. And so this is my flag. This is what I'm fighting for. Ethics in AI, it's a huge, huge topic. And I'm sure Anthony and Don are going to touch other pieces of the topic. And also I'm expecting questions from the audience so we can develop more. I chose a specific topic to talk about because I want to make you aware of your responsibility as developers to choose what you are going to create, to understand that your choices are going to create intelligent systems that may harm groups or may harm society. This is why I'm fighting to have a mandatory discipline in the CS curriculum that would awaken us, that would make us reflect on our responsibilities. So this is also my flag. We do have a law, as Virgilio said, that is in place, and and something interesting because there are some companies that already got warnings that they are not acting properly, and this year is the warning phase, but next year there's going to be bills for that, so they're going to be fined. But our law is not as complete as the European law because it's not requiring the system to open the black box, and this we should fight for. So remember, data are not neutral, and we are responsible for the choices that we make when we are building intelligent systems. Thank you. Virgilio, now is with you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Cristina, for your very nice presentation. And I think that you have raised the interest among the audience on this topic of ethics. So our next speaker is Professor Don Gotterbarn. He has an extensive experience both in academia and as a software system developer, working on systems for the US Navy, the Saudi Arabian Navy, vote counting machines, and missile defense. He has spent several decades promoting responsible computing practices, including as the director of the Software Engineering Ethics Research Institute, and also as a visiting professor at the Center for Computing Social Responsibility in England. He has taught at institutions like the University of Southern California, at government agencies like NSA, the Australian Department of Defense, and he was a visiting scientist at Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute. He led the 2018 update of the ACM Code of Ethics and the development of the IEEE ACM Software Engineering Code of Ethics and Professional Practices. These contributions to responsible computing have resulted in him being awarded the ACM Outstanding Contribution Award, the International Society for Ethics and Information Technology Joseph Weizenbaum Award, and the ACM Presidential Award. It's a pleasure, again, it's an honor for us to have Don Gotterbarn as a participant of this panel. Please, the floor is yours, Don.
Thank you very much. Okay. First, I'd like to thank everyone for thank the organizers for inviting me to this event. I'm going to express some of my thoughts about artificial intelligence and the situations with what is called AI ethics. We've already heard about a very large computing background, and I've worked in computing for a long time, starting when we had to figure out what we were first doing as computer scientists. And after a while, our failures to figure it out got called a software crisis. Highly publicized computer frauds in those early days were what was totally equated with computer ethics or anything about ethics for computing folks. We as computer scientists didn't have to worry. Computing was this expanding field where if you succeeded in doing things, you felt good. As computing increased its impact, so did the interest that went on in ethics and so on. But there were, unfortunately, evil people out there, people who were not like us well-intentioned folks, but people who want to do bad things. Unfortunately, we can add to this list with great ease and find for every country in the world some element to add to it. I don't want to come off totally negative here because I have a very positive view about computing. Part of that view is about 10 years ago, I was going blind. And thanks to computerized eye surgery, I can see again and did not go blind. And I remember after that event how important when I came home, things like an electronic reader were to me. The electronic reader was quite simple. What you had to do was simply select a size font you could read. And when you selected it, just click on the key that had the upper and lowercase a on it. And what you could do is then increase the font size. But you'll notice on this keyboard, the upper and lowercase a is right in the lower right-hand corner. Not readable by someone who is visually challenged. Here's a system that functionally worked, came in on time, within budget, and is an ethical failure because it can't be used by the people who it was supposed to be used for. Now, there are similar issues to this simple one with much more significant impact. In the design of a cockpit interface, a mixed mode display unit was used to show two different pieces of information. One was designed to show the flight path angle, minus 3.3, and the other in this same display was designed to show the rate at which the plane was descending. Minus 3.3 indicates that the plane is descending at a rate of 3,300 feet per second. In an incident in Italy, it's claimed that the pilot was at fault because the pilot did not notice the decimal point. Minus 3.3 is an angle. Minus 3.3 without some zeros after it represents 3,300. The pilot was blamed for not seeing that in this environment. This system conveying the data was an ethical failure. This is a failure of ethical responsibility. When we talk about ethics, as you just heard, it's a very broad topic, and it goes back a long way. There were opposing opinions represented by these two people. Plato on the left said that there is only one ethical standard, and it is absolute and unbreakable and categorical, and he talked about forms and the good. Aristotle on the right, with the iPad, talked about virtue ethics. Ethics is character and trainability and the way in which we react to things. Now, these philosopher dudes have been at this for 2,000 years. And one of the things they do is they invent wonderful terms like ethics being a speech act or information objects. And when we look at this trolley problem, which you just heard a few moments ago, it was originally designed to determine whether you were a consequentialist. So if you looked at the option of killing one person or killing five, or saving one person or saving five, you threw the lever and hurt the one. If you were looking at the other option and you said murder is wrong, even though the trolley was 5 people, you could not be a murderer and throw the lever and do something to change the situation. The debates and differences among these theories are of little help to AI. Currently, we are throwing all sorts of incompatible things, policy decisions, governance, enforcement standards, philosophical theories, into this thing called AI ethics. It's a swamp, and it's unmanageable to talk about it. Okay? What we need to do is to bring some order to this event. So let's start to pull out some of the things out of this ethics quagmire. We have all of these concerns about competing systems of ethics. If AI has another 2,000 years before it impacts human beings, then we can spend some time doing this. Sometimes it gets related to a acute problem. Yeah, we have these neat twists we can say. Is it ethical to have a car run someone over if they are criminals? And then we ask, what kind of criminal? And that's a fun discussion, useless actually, because sensors don't detect if someone is an athlete, a doctor, a bisexual, or even a person who would find the vaccine for COVID. It's an interesting thought experiment, but it's not AI ethics. So maybe we need to invent an AI ethical agent which will make decisions just like we make them and behave just like us. Well, we've tried that with various machine learning things, and we find out that they're biased and make bad decisions and so on. But we know that we could organize this and make some kind of strong ethical agent. I'm saying that sarcastically. Some people think that they'll find an answer in a catalog of lists. And as long as they pull out the right things and make the right list, then they'll call it AI policy or AI governance or AI code of conduct. But what happens is, when we talk about AI ethics, what we're talking about is where we have to make some kind of decision, okay? And so since AI systems make decisions, we think that they're doing ethics. And what we need is that they must follow some ethical principles. And we need to make an ethics list. So no one has ever thought about this before. all of the AI ethics people, it's very interesting to me, act as if they're on a brand new discovery and there's no history to what's gone on. Well, what happens if everybody says, I need to invent something new? You begin to get a set of rules about AI ethics. There are lists from the Autonomous Intelligence Systems, the European Commission on Robotics Intelligence, the SECOMU AI principles, the EU, just recently released some stuff. Everyone is doing this. One of the things we can do if you want some attention is to build a logo. Now, lists. Psychological studies have shown that categorical lists saying, do this, use this testing, don't do that, don't really work for ethics. What happens is, instead of making an ethical decision, people equate checking a box with making an ethical decision. I've encountered a systems analyst who thought that by doing one simple test on a complex AI system, it would be enough so he could check the box that said, did you test the system? And his response was, yes. An ethical decision, how many tests are needed to test an autonomous pacemaker, is more than picking from a list. The answer is not in the list, but it's in the people who follow the list and how they get to understand what the list requires. Codes of ethics are a waste of time. Lists are a waste of time without any support. I was reminded of this when I saw a defibrillator on the university campus. Defibrillators have the same problem as codes of ethics lists. They need support to be useful. Defibrillators use electricity to start a failing heart. Some universities hang these on walls in the lobbies of every building without educating people on how to use them or explaining how they are relevant to them. The defibrillator, or code, can be pointed to with great, pompous, impractical pride when they hang on a wall uselessly. The problem is worse when all of these defibrillators are somehow different. The ethical principle, cause no harm, is important in things like computerized surgery. But what does that mean, cause no harm, to the computer, to the coder? Sometimes known errors generate incomprehensible error messages in rather inappropriate contexts. The content completion of this system may have met its technical specifications. You could work on this person, but it failed because it did not meet the less obvious ethical requirements. There are obvious problems with multiple codes and multiple lists. The variety and inconsistent nature of documents lessens the possibility of some kind of effective global discourse. They are restricted to local interest and they miss global and common concerns. Codes which are canonical lists of prescribed behavior that you must do and proscribed behavior which you must avoid, which are check boxes, will be incomplete. You make the list, and the next AI discovery means the list is incomplete and cannot apply to diverse situations. But rules like don't kill are easy to follow in the trolley problem. You just don't throw the switch. What you need is, instead of these categorical lists, an aspirational code, which provides direction, guidance for our decision and analysis of the situation. It gives us a way to make ethical judgments. We get distracted, unfortunately, by cultural differences in making lists. Suggestion, ignore those differences. Differences in the writing font you use, whether it's Farsi or whether it's a Roman script, the use of a decimal point or a comma in financial differences, These aren't AI ethics. Focus on the cultural overlap with the same ethical needs, such as having a usable system. The difference is not an ethical principle, but the difference is how that ethical principle applies to different ethical situations. My font situation being visually challenged is one of those cases, but there are other kinds of difficulties. The design of a system to bring AI touchscreen crop planning to the Peruvian mountains. In that system, no one took account that some of these wonderful users literally dug in the dirt with their hands, and what that did to them and their ability to work a touch screen like the rest of us do. When considering a system, there are a minimal set of questions any developer should ask. Beyond the client and the employer, they should ask about the pilot reading the flight path indicator. They should ask about the visually challenged software engineer using the electronic reader. There's a massive plan that was being followed in India, where more than 1 billion Indians have uploaded their biometric details to a national database, as we just heard some of the issues about a database earlier. And this was in exchange for a unique 12-digit ID that would transform how citizens interact with their government and propel the world's second most populous country into the digital age, says the advert. In the rush to gather the information, because the gatherers were paid by how quickly they could gather the information, what happened was clerks who were doing the recording recorded their own fingerprint rather than the client's fingerprint. And I can just imagine what happened when those citizens in some rural village with minimal electricity tried to use this card and get daily food rations. This is an ethical failure. When we talk about codes of ethics, the use of the code should be primarily proactive, avoiding difficult situations and promoting positive ones. If you use checkboxes, you need to add to those checkboxes explanatory and tracking support. Transparency requires clear goal statements. If you're going to use a checkbox, check the box, say why it's there and what you used it for. An automated external defibrillator. How do I use this thing? I found it on a wall. It has prompts in it. If I take it and open it in an emergency, it says to me, this one, in English, what I should do in a normal situation. A list will do that. But what do I do if the person who has the heart attack has just come in from the rain and is soaking wet? I need to provide ways to use the defibrillator. I need to explain how to use the so-called ethical principles that appear in the list. What is needed to improve these kinds of lists? We need a workable approach to ethics. Management of all this requires steering clear of categorical extremes and landing on an AI ethics that has clear expectations. It should not be hard for us to make ethical decisions. We do it every day. A workable approach to ethics in general is not these philosophical theories, but to consider my decision-making, where it involves one's ability to affect other people's lives. This is our professional decisions, when we make them in AI or any computing, have ethical impact that needs to constantly be acknowledged and recognized by us as we're doing things. Have uploaded their biometric details to a national database, as we just heard some of the issues about a database earlier. And this was in exchange for a unique 12-digit ID that would transform how citizens interact with their government and propel the world's second most populous country into the digital age, says the advert. In the rush to gather the information, because the gatherers were paid by how quickly they could gather the information. What happened was clerks who were doing the recording recorded their own fingerprint rather than the client's fingerprint. And I can just imagine what happened when those citizens in some rural village with minimal electricity tried to use this card and get daily food rations. This is an ethical failure. When we talk about codes of ethics, the use of the code should be primarily proactive, avoiding difficult situations and promoting positive ones. If you use checkboxes, you need to add to those checkboxes explanatory and tracking support. Transparency requires clear goal statements. If you're going to use a checkbox, check the box, say why it's there and what you used it for. An automated external defibrillator. How do I use this thing? I found it on a wall. It has prompts in it. If I take it and open it in an emergency, it says to me, this one, in English, what I should do in a normal situation. A list will do that. But what do I do if the person who has the heart attack has just come in from the rain and is soaking wet? I need to provide ways to use the defibrillator. I need to explain how to use the so-called ethical principles that appear in the list. What is needed to improve these kinds of lists? We need a workable approach to ethics. Management of all this requires steering clear of categorical extremes and landing on an AI ethics that has clear expectations. It should not be hard for us to make ethical decisions. We do it every day. A workable approach to ethics in general is not these philosophical theories, but to consider my decision-making, where it involves one's ability to affect other people's lives. This is our professional decisions, when we make them in AI or any computing, have ethical impact that needs to constantly be acknowledged and recognized by us as we're doing things. Since I was lucky enough to be involved in the ACM's new development of a new code of computing ethics, I'm going to be using this for most of the talk. The code has been adopted by several AI organizations and recently by 35 national computing societies. When we talk about ethics, Terry Winograd has distinguished, I find this a useful distinction, the word ethics to something, a term I think he invented called ethicing. Ethicing is a verb. It's when a computer professional starts to follow and work through some high-level code of ethics. These principles on a high-level code can be narrowed to guide specific day-to-day activities of an AI professional. Further, ethicing distinguishes a strategic domain of academic study, that stuff they do, from what we have to do when we every day have to interpret, choose, and assess our activities, where we need to distinguish what we can do in computing and what we should do. Since everything we do has consequences, ethicing should be routine for us. We frequently, unfortunately, frame out ethics in our analysis when we work on a complex technical system. We focus just on the technical stuff and don't look outside to how that impacts others. Ethical decision-making takes some significant time. Psychologists have said there's actually 2 stages to ethical decision-making. There's the first one where we use our common information that we have learned from parents or religious groups, and we immediately respond. But then we stop to think about it, and there's another slower, more conscious and more logical process. Ethical decision-making isn't a video game. Ethical decision-making takes cognitive attention in order to consider aspects beyond the way situations are framed for us. Make the font larger, make the font smaller. For who, you need to ask. We need to take proactive care. This is an ethical analysis approach we've tried at the ACM. And we have this acronym CARE. Before you do anything, consider the relevant ethical elements, who's involved and what are the alternatives. Analyze the impact of those elements. And once you've done all of this, come up with some possible approaches and review the various responsibilities of the new Brazilian law on privacy, or who's going to be using the system. Evaluate those alternatives and pick the one which works the best. Ethicing requires an analysis of the impacts of a system on a broad range of stakeholders.
So thank you, Don, for your great presentation. And now our next speaker is Anthony Wong. He is a technology lawyer and advisor to government. He's a technology lawyer and advisor to government and corporate clients in Australia and internationally. He is a key industry thought leader and has served on the Australian Government IT Industry Innovation Council. At board level, highlights include President and Chair of the Board of the Australian Computer Society, as the Chair of the NSW Government ICT Advisory Panel, and as a member of the NSW Government Digital Transformation Task Force. Anthony has double degrees in computer science and law from Monash University, a Master of Laws in Media, Communication and IT from UNSW, and in Master of Intellectual Property from UTS, Australia. He has also held senior management positions in multinational corporation governance. His multidisciplinary career traversed legal practice, multinationals in the IT industry, including as CIO of the Australian Tourist Commission during the Sydney 2000 Olympics, led the digital transformation of Thomson, now Thomson Reuters, in the Asia Pacific, and with the multinational Philips in their IT division. Anthony is the managing director of AGW Lawyers and Consultants, a multidisciplinary legal and advisory practice advising in many areas of law and technology on IP contracts, licensing, and the emergent and disruptive risks and issues arising from 4.0 industrial technology, including IoT, big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual and augmented reality. And so it's an honor to have Tom as a participant of our panel. Please, Tom, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everybody, from Sydney, Australia. So it's morning for me now. So before I start, I'd just like to thank the Brazilian Computer Society and your president, Romendo, for inviting me to speak to this topic today. Also, thanks to my other two speakers who touch on the ethics of artificial intelligence. During this brief presentation that I'll be doing, I'll be looking at the legal aspects of AI. And this particular presentation is based on a number of other presentations that I've given, including at the World Summit for Information, WSIS, in July this year, and ICHCAI in 2017, and also the material that I've extracted from my chapter, which can be published in the IFIP 60th anniversary Jubilee book called Unimagined Futures, ICT, Opportunity and Challenges, which will be published in November of this year. The topics that I'll be looking at is just briefly touch on the articles issues, as Christina and Don's already touched on that extensively. So I would just briefly look at that and then moving on to the different ethical framework for AI, and then moving on to the legal aspects of AI. So briefly, I think Christina's already touched on the issues about algorithm and biases and discrimination. So I won't talk much to that at this stage, but to refer you to an article that I wrote in 2016 in the Australian newspaper when I was president of the Australian Computer Society about ethics and AI. So that was really one of my first publications on AI and ethics. Also like to give a number of examples that I've used over the number of years. The examples of bias and discriminations that we've seen around the world, including issues with Microsoft Tay, how the chatbot was corrupted in 24 hours, to the Google image search, and issues with recruitment with the Amazon AI tool, and also with the use of AI in criminal justice, especially in the United States. Christina also mentioned about the trolley problem, so I wouldn't go through that again, but that's a very typical example that's been illustrated in some presentations around the world. So as I mentioned recently, I participate with Don and members of the IFIP IP3 panel to present to the World Summit on the Information Society. We talked about ethics and how we need to refer to ethics and beyond ethics. So I'd just like to share with you a couple of my slides from that presentation. In that presentation, I mentioned that I reviewed in 2019 a number of ethical frameworks around the world, starting with the Australian framework, the European, and the OECD and the World Economic Forum. So these are examples of some of the 70 plus and growing frameworks on artificial intelligence. And obviously this framework has stirred up significant debates around the world about what they actually mean. But I think the debates now have matured in 2020 to look at more about guidelines on how those sort of principles should now be operationalized and implemented to minimize risk and negative outcomes. So today I'd like to take on that challenge and mention some of those operational aspects and the legal implications. On this slide, I have taken 3 of those principles and done a comparative analysis of what issues they are dealing with, starting with the Australian principles that were published in 2019 and the European Union in the same year, and also from the Information Technology Law Association, their AI policy framework for responsible AI. If you look across the 3 columns, you can see generically what sort of issues the typical AI frameworks would cover, including about harm, safety, privacy, fairness, transparency, and explainability, and accountability. So they are quite similar in most respects, but in terms of the iTech law policy, they also look at intellectual property, who owns the intellectual property created by artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, and also about the issues with open and fair use of data. One of the things that 2 other speakers mentioned of is the ethical parameters about AI. But I'd like to more espouse on the ethics. When we say ethics, whose ethics are we actually propounding to uphold? recently, I also gave a talk to Buddhist University, where they talk about ethics and AI from a religious perspective. And that was an interesting insight for me, because they're looking at from a perspective that I've never shared before in terms of morality. From a religious perspective, how does a religious group look at ethics and AI and how it actually impacts on their philosophy and their way of practices. So example, one of the things about values of ethics in terms of culture, we can look at the social credit scores determined in certain countries, where they use credit scores to determine access to services, credit and jobs, and whether you're allowed to travel. Those are particular values to particular national geographic countries that perhaps would not be shared so much perhaps in Australia and the European or the United States in terms of that context. At WESIS in July, we talked about ethics is excellent, and we're talking about implementing ethics to operationalize ethics. But as most of you understand, ethics are not legally binding. So how do we actually make sure that some of those principles of ethics are actually coded and implemented into our laws and regulation? And that's really the substance of my presentation today. Because over the last number of years, there's much debate about who among the different players in the design, development, and deployment of AI, which actors and players should be responsible and liable to account for any damages that might be caused. The complexity here in terms of the legal principles would be the autonomy and self-learning capability of AI in this instance. Has that changed the chain of what we call legally the causation of harm to the human life or health or property? So I'd like to expand on that more in the next couple of slides. As I mentioned, it is based on a chapter of this upcoming book in IFIP to celebrate 60th anniversary, be published by Springer in November, and it will be freely available online for users. One of the first issues that I've talked about in terms of regulation relates to legal personhood or legal standing. Historically, over the last many years, we've seen legal status been given to slaves, to women, children, corporations, and more recently, during my research, we found that personality is now being given to landscape and nature, which is an interesting perspective. So if you look in terms of India, we have two has now been granted legal status. What would that mean in operation? And even in New Zealand, a number of nature, the river Wanganui and mountains and a national park has also been granted legal status. Previously, corporations were the only non-human entity recognized by law. And in this regard, granting personality to robots and intelligent autonomous system is not a simple case of equating rights and obligations like we do to corporations, because we need to look at where we're at in terms of those systems. When we look about giving legal personality to intelligent and autonomous systems, it would include giving them the benefit of that legal personality. So rights to intellectual property, if created by an autonomous systems with legal status. That means they can actually own the intellectual property from the result of their efforts directly, perhaps in joint ownership with the developers or producers of the artificial intelligence. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of development in that area from the European Union, starting with the European Parliament in 2017, when the majority, 396 votes versus 123 votes, voted in favor to consider granting some sort of electronic person rights to intelligent robots. To date, no laws have been created in the European Union, although there have been a number of reports been written about that subject. In the meantime, we've seen a lot of opposition to that concept, starting with the open letter from experts in robotics and artificial intelligence in the European Union against such granting robots with legal status. And even one of the reports mentioned about how do we give more responsibility or allocate that responsibility to a thing called autonomous technology. So if you look at the basis of our legal system of our laws, most of them are based on the premise of human decision makers, not systems or computers. In this regard, there's a difference between other emerging technologies and artificial intelligence in that with machine learning and certain learning capabilities, there's the ability to learn from data and actually make some decisions about things. But all that means that we need to grant legal personality to those systems. The present case at the moment with the debate for electronic personhood is weak, and the negatives currently outweigh the benefits, but at least for the foreseeable future. So who knows in the future when we get autonomous systems matching to the level of humans, maybe that's something we can consider. But at this stage, the case for legal personality is weak compared to the benefits. The next topic in the legal read I talked about is responsibility and liability. When we consider about doing laws for artificial intelligence, we've got to look at the diverse areas that we need to cover, from business laws to education, to healthcare, to telecommunications, to infrastructure, logistic defense, all aspects of law, which we already have laws in those areas specifically, as well as general law. To compound the complexity, in addition to AI systems, we also have other integration with complex technologies like Internet of Things environment with the cloud, and the variety of players and actors involved will make it very difficult to assess where the potential harm could originate and who should be liable for that loss. So that is one of the complexity that we are actually looking at the moment. So these are some of the questions on the slide that have been posed during the debate about who would be responsible for the harm or damage caused by AI and autonomous systems, because there is a layer of code written by someone, and whether the code that is integrated in the overall physical systems and the complexity of other emerging technologies, would it be fair for the producer or the programmer to, what we call in legal sense, foresee the potential loss or damage that it could cause in those specific circumstances? And I think that's the crux of where the legal issues currently lie, whether the loss will be foreseeable. Also in the debate about liability and responsibility, we have also in terms of many reports looking at whether instead of giving personhood to artificial intelligence, we should establish an insurance scheme like we do for cars and vehicles, so that we would have a system where the victims will be compensated and so forth. The other legal recourse that we could look at is in terms of product liability laws, where strict liability rules are imposed in regulations and laws to compensate victims for potential harm regardless of fault. So those are the two current regimes currently being talked about. The next particular topic relates to transparency and explainability of AI. Currently, with our system, it's not quite clear how our courts and regular systems would treat in terms of decisions made by AI, although I have a couple examples that I would illustrate further down in a number of slides. Or whether governments and people would be allowed to sub-delegate decisions to autonomous AI systems, and would that be lawful in the current regulatory framework that we live to? The number of questions relating to transparency and explainability of AI include the black box attributes. What type of explanation would be appropriate and useful for which particular audience? How and why does the model perform the way it does? And how comprehensive does the explanation need to be or adapted to different types of audiences? If we look across the board, including Brazil and the European Union, we now currently have two legislation, the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, commonly referred to as GDPR, and now the Brazilian Data Protection, which came into effect in September this year. There are provisions now to look at giving individuals the right in terms of review or not to be subject to decisions made solely by automated decision making systems, and giving data subjects or the individuals who are impacted certain rights. So in terms of the European Union, some of the rights include access to information about the automated decision making, but as I note, it has to be solely automated, not partly by humans. And rights include the right to have a human to intervene and the right for the data subject to contest the decision. And I believe the European Union's equivalent's gone even further than the current Brazilian data protection law by insisting on providing meaningful information about the logic and the significance and the consequences of the automated decision. I've given 4 different AI automation related cases. They're all very recent. The very first one relates to a case in the UK on AI investment strategy, where huge losses was made as a result of using AI to make decisions. This case is currently in the UK courts. We also have the number 2 in the case of the Netherlands, the use of government automated system for fraud detection that has been deemed invalid by the Netherlands court, and a very recent action, social welfare class action in Australia, which is scheduled to be heard in November this year. Class action taken against our Australian Commonwealth Government on social welfare and the ultimate decisions made by AI.
This is
lastly,
this is if you
thank you.
To the end of the presentation, that would be nice because we already have 20 minutes. So if you could move to wrap up the next. Okay.
Lastly, I'd like to do a case study on my last example about the Boeing 7 MAX, because that's to do with some of the pressing issues. It's not just economic losses that potentially we could suffer, but actually loss of lives. So in that case, we had 2 airplane crashes with more in excess of 300 deaths. So briefly, the facts. Boeing did a major redesign of their 737, but they introduced a new software called MCAS, which is used to compensate for changes in the placement of the bigger size engines for 737 MAX. The software would activate automatically without any pilot command with sensor data. But the existence of that software were not disclosed to most pilots. So the investigation so far have implicated that software in both airplane crashes and the numerous reports that just been published in the last few months that illustrate the complex interplay of software with physical systems. How would ICT programmers foresee that if one piece of their software is integrated to many parts, including parts of physical systems? Who will be responsible for the holistic actions and results from the use of that integrated system? So in terms of the Boeing, the case, it has cost the company billions of dollars, and the company is also facing ongoing criminal and civil sanctions. So I'm going to skip over the implications on AI and employment law. In my link on item 7, I provided a link to a separate presentation that I provided in Cambodia on employment law and AI. You can actually get access to that by clicking on the link. So my concluding remarks, significant issues with the complex AI, about how we're going to manage that as we move on into the future, knowing that AI creates potentially many benefits, but there are risks and issues that we need to resolve. And I think critically, because most of our established laws are based on human decisions, there'll be a major paradigm shift in the thinking and redrafting of aspects of our long-established principles, because AI are not just like any other emerging technologies, because they have the abilities to learn, to adapt, make decisions from data and life experiences in quotation. So government and industries have very important roles in moving forward in creation of policy, strategies, and the laws and regular frameworks that we need to work with AI and into the future. But I think ICT professionals, in conclusion, we are so well placed because we are working on that technology, and we can look at, in terms of gleaning through what's going to come up in terms of some of the issues that we're going to need to address with government legislators and regulators. So, and on that note, thank you very much. It's a very quick snapshot. The chapter in the publication coming up that I mentioned deal with some of the issues in more detail. So So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation with very interesting aspects of the implication of law. Now we are going to start our Q&A sessions. We have a number of questions that already arrived in our chat. So I'm going to put some questions for you guys. I also have a question that I would like to hear your view. So I'm going to start with my short question to move to questions made by the audience. My question is, it's a practical question. How should we teach AI ethics in computer science programs, courses? Should we have professionals from CS professionals teaching ethics, or should we ask for people from the philosophy department to teach ethics? That's the first question.
Hi, I have a long-standing opinion on that goes back to teaching computer ethics starting from 1987 when we were dealing with it.
That's great. Yeah.
There is, first, I ought to say I have a PhD in philosophy. So I've lived that philosophical world, and then I've built systems that kill people and support their lives. There were different systems. Okay. One of the things that happens is philosophy is designed to have arguments and discussions about this theory of ethics versus this theory of ethics versus the weak points. And that's a wonderful thing to do. But when I go out there and I have to decide whether I'm going to use a repeat until or a do while loop in computing, that may not seem to be ethical to the programmer you teach as a computer science professor or an AI professor. But as soon as you tell them that's going to control the toxic drip in a chemotherapy application, if you do a repeat until, the drip kills somebody before it tests it. If you do a do while, it tests it before it kills somebody. You as the computer scientist, when you tell the student that, whether you like it or not, are teaching ethics. My humble opinion is that you shouldn't bring in some irrelevant specialist who doesn't know anything about AI and multiple different forms of machine learning models to tell your AI students how to code. What you need to do is to give them practical examples. And the quick answer to my question is that, to your question is, you teach it in the technical class because that's where it's relevant. Those are the people who make these allegedly autonomous machines. And they need to put the ethics into their development of the autonomous machines. They don't need to know phrases like whether ethics is a speech act or some Platonic idealistic thing on a wall. That doesn't help.
So let me jump and answer, because I'm part of a group that is coordinated by Professor Flavia Fragufi and Marisa Ferro from LMCC, that we are actually inviting people to help us exactly to design an ethical discipline that exactly meets what Don just said. Like we don't need abstract discipline, but we also need some background, because we need to be humble. For example, you have a very special background, but we, as computer science, we might not see that as clear as you do. So I think that we should be humble to ask for help from the philosophy department, not for them to teach, but help us to enlighten and to teach. And I agree, teach people by practice, so they should feel the consequences of their actions when they do a while and when they choose a database to teach a machine. So they should know that they are responsible. And this is what I think that we should include and should be mandatory, but not like those kind of courses that people just, okay, let me check, I did that, and don't learn anything. I want the students to reflect on their actions. So this is why I like, to create scenarios when they should see, wow, what did I do? I killed many people because I decided to automate who is gonna get the respirator, and I didn't think it through, but I committed a crime and I should be responsible because I coded it in such a way that the computer learned something very unethical. And we should bring to their responsibility. So I will invite you, Don, to help us designing this course, and we are starting in Rio de Janeiro State.
There are hundreds of pieces of material I've written on that. But anyway, go ahead, Tony. I'm sorry. Anthony, you ready to say something?
In terms of the Australian context, we have been teaching ethics as part of the core body of knowledge for ICT professionals for many, many years already.
Yeah.
So it's a mandatory subject in Australia. You can see that in the core body of knowledge. There have been lots of arguments a few years ago about dropping it. Fortunately, it's been retained. But as to who should be teaching that, currently, from my understanding, I think IT professionals or academics have been teaching them as part of their course. It's a separate component, but I think in this day and age, we should include experience from other disciplines in actually teaching that course, because even when I'm going through, from what my experience as a lawyer, giving the examples of real life situations where there are implications or damages, lawsuit, people actually listen. It's more than just ethics. It's about impact on human beings, on their lives, on their socio-economic factors, on their rights. So it goes beyond just understanding about ethics. It has physical implications. Thank you.
I forgot to say that we also should bring in the design of the course somebody from the law school, so somebody that would understand the consequences for the developers when they design something. So I just forgot, but you're right.
One minor comment, Christina, you had said they should talk about violating the law. And my concern is that we're not all as astute as Anthony and know about the law or are lawyers. But what we need to do when we talk about ethics, it is different from the law. So right now we have a decision support algorithm for judges in the United States, so that when a criminal comes in, they run this program that says, what's the recidivism rate of this type of thing? So then they will decide which of a list of penalties. So it's the judge deciding the penalty. Now the software AI developer wants to think, well, now it's the judge's decision. But the AI developer wrote the code. Now in this country, we have a surprise because it tends to claim that dark-skinned people tend to have a higher recidivism rate than white people. Well, the algorithm that is used in there includes a line that says, if you have an early contact with the police, you are more likely to be a recidivist. But you know what that means? If you are an immigrant, if you live in a ghetto society, if you're disadvantaged in any way, you're likely to have a earlier impact. So that line, if they thought about it, and that's part of the thing that I was arguing for. There's this stepped analysis you have to do.
Hey guys, and we move to the next question. We have a lot of questions here, so I'm trying to cover the ones that bring some important aspects of the impact of AI. So another question is that for the three of us of you is, how do you see AI impacting today's workplaces with on-demand jobs such as those used in apps for people transportation and food services? And there is another one that is somehow linked to this, so I'm going to also state that. So you could please comment on the ethics related to ghost workers whose output is used for machine learning. Okay. So the first one is related to the impact of AI on workers, of app workers, and the second one is what's the impact of these workers, ghost workers that provide data for training data sets.
Well, I don't know if I understood properly, but I think that AI is going to impact workers because in the first moment, it's going to take the job of many people. So on the other hand, I also think that the AI are bringing new horizons for other people that didn't have a chance. For instance, the lady that worked for me, she doesn't know how to read. It's kind of incredible. But she uses perfectly her mobile phone, and I don't know how she can use some app to translate what she's saying to another language. So this is AI bringing another horizons to people. So it's kind of a contrast of losing many jobs, but also giving some other opportunities. From a part of the ghost workers, what I am afraid is, I don't know if this was the question, but this is my concern, is about the elections and about these ghost people that are going to retweet some messages pro some candidates or against others, or that will like fake somebody talking. So I'm very afraid of that because the technology is allowing this kind of distortion, and it's not in the future. It happened before and it's happening now. The difference is now we are aware, so we should counterattack, and I think that we could counterattack using AI. So I don't know if I touch what they asked.
The question about the impact on work is very broad, obviously. I mean, one of the impacts, the obvious one, is it will take jobs. So we no longer need translators. One of the ways somebody sends me an email text in Portuguese and I pop up Google Translate and throw it in there and it takes the job. I have arthritis in my hand, so I don't text well. But I push that microphone button on my text machine and I talk to it and it types out the text, sometimes saying very strange things, but it does the job anyway. It also impacts how you do your work. I mean, think about how our response to COVID would be if there wasn't AI and we didn't, for example, have the Zoom and the technology to do things and record things. I'm concerned with I don't fully understand the ghost worker example. I know one of the problems with AI that has occurred is not ghost workers, but us not using a diversified enough work group to develop AI. So, I mean, it's the standard where Google had this problem where cameras, when they were taking pictures, could not identify dark-toned people. And everybody raised their hands about racism. Well, if you're in an office with a bunch of light-skinned people, Asians, white Americans, and you're all male, 80% male in these operations, you test it on one another, and you have a particular facial structure and bone structure. And they thought it worked and were quite happy. And it was not racist, but a failure to as I say, consider the broader range of stakeholders, and as Anthony has indicated, the impacts that these things have. And that's what they need to consider. So I don't know whether ghost workers means internet bots or what.
Well, I think that ghost workers are those workers that label data sets and label data for training data sets.
Oh my God.
That's what that's my
Right.
what I think about the question. I don't know what's
Okay. My response would be the same. They need to consider
same,
who gets
yeah.
impacted, and they are, whatever the employment sociology is, in the U.S., 20 to 40-year-old, light-skinned people, male. And if those people are labeling data sets, they will have a very narrow view of things and miss a whole lot.
Tom, do you have any comments to make?
Yes, so unfortunately, I skip across the 2 slides that I have on that issue about employment. But if you look at the slides, there was a link to a presentation I gave in Cambodia about employment and impact on employment law. So there's a whole 40 slides on those issues. And in that presentation, I talked about, rather than AI displacing jobs, if you look across the many published reports, now they're talking about it replacing tasks. Tasks will be automated across many occupations and jobs. Yes, certain jobs will disappear, especially the manual intensive ones. But in terms of jobs like lawyers and doctors, parts of their tasks will be automated. And I think those are good things, because we can then move on to the higher value, the more minded aspects that we can excel in, the creativity, the innovation, looking at the things which are not easily automated. In terms of law, we're going to have struggled to look at changes to our employment law, because we're going to have robots working alongside humans. So what's the performance management for non-humans and for humans working together? Where are the safety and health and risk aspect that we need to consider? When you talk about unions, what the unions going to say about robots coming into the workplace, not just the factories. So when I spoke in Cambodia, we're looking at the impact on AI on jobs, particularly like in countries like Cambodia and Asia, where there are lots of factories. They're going to automate all that. So those countries need to now plan for how robots will take on some of their jobs, especially when it contributes so much to their GDP at the moment.
Well, thank you, Tom. I have another question here and try to read it. That's one related to systems that make vital decisions. So it's about decision making that are responsible for important decisions, such as autonomous car or medical systems. Should those systems be auditable by construction? Could this be guaranteed without imposing code openings? So it's a question related to open the code to understand what's there. Maybe that's what the question is about. It's important to answer that in the of commercial protections of code and things like that.
In the dark ages of last century, I did auditing of vote counting machines. And when those, prior to the election, when they became especially electronic, but vote counting machines had software which companies had as proprietary. I was hired working for the US government to audit that these things would count votes correctly. You sign a document that says you will not disclose the nature of the system. You look at the system. If there are faults on it, you talk to the people who developed it. You then submit a report that this is acceptable or it fails. But you protect the copyright. Some commercial vendors after 2002 in the US said, the code is ours, it's proprietary, you may not look at it. We will tell you whether it works. That's just like Anthony's example of the CMAX on the Boeing. Boeing told us whether it would work. That's not the way it should be done. You should have auditors that are like any kind of other system auditor. They look at the system, they keep it information confidential. If it passes, they say so. If it doesn't, they say so.
It's important to answer that in the of commercial protections of code and things like that.
In the dark ages of last century, I did auditing of vote counting machines. And when those, prior to the election, when they became especially electronic, but vote counting machines had software which companies had as proprietary. I was hired working for the US government to audit that these things would count votes correctly. You sign a document that says you will not disclose the nature of the system. You look at the system. If there are faults on it, you talk to the people who developed it. You then submit a report that this is acceptable or it fails. But you protect the copyright. Some commercial vendors after 2002 in the US said, the code is ours, it's proprietary, you may not look at it. We will tell you whether it works. That's just like Anthony's example of the CMAX on the Boeing. Boeing told us whether it would work. That's not the way it should be done. You should have auditors that are like any kind of other system auditor. They look at the system, they keep it information confidential. If it passes, they say so. If it doesn't, they say so. I don't think the problem is new about proprietary software. It only becomes an issue when people who have done something wrong want to hide their software from others and declare, I own it, you can't look at it, I think.
No, I fully
Okay, that's a good. Okay, Christina. Any comments from Tom?
I get this right. Questions about black box and disclosing trade secrets and proprietary software.
That's right.
I think the current debate is that we should use auditors, that Don mentioned, to actually do that independently. But in the case of Boeing, the FAA was supposed to do the auditing, but they were compromised because they delegate some of that responsibility back to Boeing. So here you can see where the conflicts are. So we really do need to have independence, if you're going to do a real audit, to make sure that they are not compromised in any way. So at the moment, obviously, one of the exemptions is if you have a trade secret, you don't want to disclose that because then people can gang up on your algorithm or actually use that in their next innovation. So that's a balancing and that's a challenge. But I think auditing is one of the ways to get around it at this moment in time.
So just want to add something. I think it is in addition to auditing, because I think the auditing and the auditor may be a very confined view. So I think that we should have something that the user, the people that are victims of the answers of the system, could somehow express, not opening the black box,
Right.
but expressing from the outside to see, for example, suppose that they are not decide not give me a loan, or maybe because of me. So, but it is true if I can get a set of people with different attributes and got different answers. If every time a woman with my characteristics asks for a loan, they don't get it. It might be the case that we have to ask for the auditing. It's like, I understand about confidentiality, so we cannot open and show everything from a product, but we should be able to at least to suspect that there is something against me or against a specific group. So I forgot to.
A good auditor first ought to have backbone, which the FAA seemed to lack, and Anthony is correct on that. But a good auditor, like any good tester, ought to look at the people that are impacted by the system and get what tests they will do by considering you and saying, you want to know, will it hurt people of this sort? When I audited some medical systems, I'm not a doctor, and I went to some doctors to say, what are some things that I need to look at that I wouldn't understand about this system? And using their contributions, you structure the audit.
But Don, I think that me as a user, as a citizen, I want to be sure that I have a Don doing the auditing. I'm thinking about bureaucracy. I don't know who is the auditor. Maybe they put, I know, somebody that doesn't have the expertise to do a thorough auditing the system. So I want to have the right to at least suspect something's going on and ask for a proper auditing. So the problem is not if I have a system that was properly audited, but I don't trust the system. I don't trust that much human beings. Like, I want to have like at least the right to argue and to suspect something's wrong.
One of the
Thank
issues
you.
with AI, can I mention
Yeah,
something
sure,
quickly?
please. Yeah, please go
One
ahead.
of the issues with advanced machine learning and deep learning is the difficulty to explain the logic. So even if we do have auditors doing that, what skill sets do we need of these auditors to be able to explain the logic of those complex systems? So I think that will be a challenge going forward, and what training would they need to be? So I could see a couple of fused professions moving in that area, not just IT alone, but in terms of if you have a liability issue, you actually have to have some of this information to establish a claim for damages, why they're responsible. So instead of gathering the evidence to establish a successful claim, it's going to be very difficult for an individual who doesn't have any of the skills and have to rely on some external parties to actually do that for them. Maybe those are expert witnesses. So those are things that we need to ponder as we move on. It's not just one or the other. I think it's a series of people we're going to need and use: expert witness, auditors. We're going to require on the developers and producers to be producing things, to be able to explain things. But we also need regulators who need to establish some benchmarks moving forward about what's acceptable in terms of explainability, transparency as well.
I think that what we should do is we should design system that could self-regulate, that should be able to stress the data to see if there are any prejudice. And if it detects some, the system would say, well, I need a human help. I am kind of not doing a good job. It's kind of But we need to think it in advance. We need to plan and to design during the development.
So I'm going to move to another question. That's going to be the last question. There are many good questions here. I tried to combine some of them to pick up what I see as the most important topics. And this one is related to some emerging global issues that bring ethical concerns. I will just show two of them. It's the biometric data systems and also the autonomous systems such as weapons. So what kind of what are your views on these problems? And it's important to consider, for instance, that biometric systems can also open the door for many human rights violations, for instance. And so I would like to hear the experts' opinion on this and new emerging global issues that are related to ethics.
One of the things I said early on is when I talked about this quagmire of ethics, the question about biometrics is massive and crosses various areas. You have health analysis programs that a doctor will use, feeding your symptoms into the system, and the system will say, you have this disease and this is the medication. The fact that that system at that low level related to you says these things impacts the doctor's liability calculus. The doctor may think the system is wrong, but if he goes against the system, he opens him or she opens herself to all sorts of liability claims. That's at the very low level of the biometrics. The India one, the example in my talk, they're gathering all sorts of incredible biometric data. Fingerprints for people who have worn their fingers to a point where there are hardly any prints. That's going to determine whether they get medical insurance in India, whether they get an income, and that has global impact. So that's just one side.
Okay, thank you, Don. Christina, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, this is a different, and I would like to take the weapon. I am completely against autonomous weapon, intelligent autonomous weapon. I don't think that we are in such, well, I'm against this weapon anyway. But because the mistakes can give like huge proportions. And as I said in my presentation, any intelligence system, they look the world in the frame that we provided them. So they cannot amplify and see some other variables that we as humans can look at the spur of the moment and say, wow, there is something new that I could do. And so this, I'm very afraid that we are going towards that. And I agree with the employees, I think that was Google's employees, that just dismiss themselves from a project that would help to develop autonomous weapons. So this would be our ethical behavior, not feeding this industry with that, because first of all, it's not good for humanity. But secondly, we forget about the frame problem. The machine only sees what we define it up front. So there are many other things that are not going to be taken into account during the decision. So I'm kind of really scared when we talk about autonomous or AI for weapons. So my message here is that we should fight against that. We should definitely move for banning these autonomous weapons. This is my point of view. And I think this is my last word here. We should be thinking how we are going to turn off the machines, because we might develop them, and if they got smart and autonomous with the Internet of Things and with all of these distributed, cloud computing and distributed way, we might create things that we could not turn off. And this is my last word for my concern.
Thank you, Cristina. So I would appreciate it if Anthony could make some comments, because it's our last question.
On the autonomous weapons, personally, I'm against autonomous weapons, but I don't think how we can stop that momentum. Because if you look at history of our human species, all countries would use to their advantage technology in all wireframes to get ahead in terms of the advantages. So I'm not sure even the United Nations will be able to regulate and manage that moving forward, considering the difficulties we're already encountering to do with nuclear weapons, let alone autonomous or artificial intelligence embedded autonomous weapons. So I think there are challenges ahead. Personally, I'm against it, but I think we do have some big issues to deal with in terms of that regard. Coming back to biometrics, in terms of facial recognition, we've seen a number of companies already stop themselves off their technology to the enforcement bodies around the world. In terms of the Australian usage, the Parliament has insisted that we first need to establish late principles about how we're going to use some of that before we actually implement them in the context of our society and everyday use. There are huge issues in terms of privacy and obviously human rights. Human rights issues about utilities of those technologies. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'd like to first to thank all of you for the wonderful presentations. I have to say that I learned a lot from the three speakers, and I think that the audience also benefited from the expertise that
Artificialmente humano ou humanamente artificial? Mais resistente, mais rápido, mais forte, sempre à procura de mais.
Parece que somos motivados pela mesma coisa.
Hoje sou tão humano quanto máquina.
Hoje sou tão máquina quanto humano.
Somos inseparáveis.
Juntos construímos conexões.
Exploramos a realidade como ela é em cada detalhe.
Somos mais inteligentes juntos. Criador e criatura em perfeita harmonia.
Mas nada realmente é perfeito. A todo momento enfrentamos recursos limitados.
Desastres naturais.
Desigualdade social.
Falta de segurança.
Observando todas as discrepâncias, parece que o mundo todo está contra nós.
Juntos observamos que a vida nem sempre é tão simples.
Sim, vamos seguir adiante. Encarando todos os desafios, por eles crescemos juntos. Meu amigo, posso contar com você?
Em cada passo da jornada.
A cada novo avanço, unidos para os desafios da nova sociedade 5.0.
Diretamente aqui dos estúdios da UFMT, diretamente de Cuiabá, Mato Grosso, e eu estou aqui ao lado de Eunice Nunes, coordenadora geral do 40º Congresso da Sociedade Brasileira de Computação, para passar uns recadinhos importantíssimos para vocês que estão aí nos acompanhando nessa nossa programação, nessa tarde de quarta-feira. Eunice, diz aí para a gente, quais são os recados que você tem para passar para os nossos congressistas, para quem está nos assistindo, um checklist e dicas aí importantes que o nosso congressista não pode deixar de fazer nessa jornada do conhecimento, durante todo esse congresso que ele está aqui com a gente. Diz aí pra gente, compartilha com a gente essas dicas.
Boa tarde. Além de assistir às palestras, toda a programação científica, vários artigos, trabalhos de teses e dissertações, de iniciação científica, os minicursos, nós pedimos que os nossos congressistas lembrem-se de nos entregar a pesquisa de satisfação. Como que vocês fazem isso? Nós temos na área do credenciamento, no espaço 40 graus, no palco, no foyer dos auditórios, um totem escrito pesquisa de satisfação. Então, a gente pede que vocês cliquem, preencham o questionário e enviem, porque é muito importante a opinião de cada um de vocês. Preenchendo diariamente a pesquisa de satisfação, em alguns pontos nós conseguimos o quê? Melhorar a cada dia o nosso evento. Então, preencham. É importante também lembrar que o preenchimento da pesquisa de satisfação é obrigatória para a liberação do certificado. Então, ao menos um dia do congresso, vocês precisam preencher a pesquisa, porque vai ficar condicionado. Por falar em certificados, que é uma coisa que muitos congressistas perguntam, os certificados ficarão prontos, liberados na próxima semana. Então, até o dia 27 de novembro, vocês poderão emitir o certificado digital, de forma online, pelo nosso site do CSBC 2020. Lá vai ter um link, porque vocês vão acessar e vão, então, encontrar o certificado, que vai ser de diferentes categorias. Certificado de participante, certificado de apresentação de artigo, certificado de coordenador de sessão, coordenador de evento, enfim, são diversos certificados. Bem, deixa só que eu fiz uma pequena anotação aqui para poder lembrar de tudo que eu tenho que falar para vocês. Além do nosso formulário de pesquisa de satisfação, nós temos também a cápsula do tempo. É muito importante que vocês colaborem conosco depositando a cápsula do tempo, o seu formulário. Então, vocês têm ali na entrada do teatro uma caixa parecido com um baú, que tem a cápsula do tempo ali para vocês depositarem. Então, é muito simples, são pouquíssimas perguntas, a identificação é opcional e nós vamos abrir essa cápsula do tempo daqui a 10 anos. No próximo CSBC aí, a gente fala que é a 50ª edição, né? Daqui a 10 anos. Então, a gente pede que vocês preencham, coloquem o que vocês desejam, que vocês esperam do futuro daqui a 10 anos.
Essa cápsula do tempo ela é muito legal, porque traz essa percepção. Qual é a percepção que os congressistas têm do hoje e daqui 10 anos vai abrir, e como é que estaremos daqui 10 anos, né? Então, pessoal, muito importante a participação de vocês dentro dessa cápsula do tempo. Aproveitem essa dica de ouro, hein, do Congresso.
Bem, além disso, nós temos os nossos canais de comunicação que vocês têm acompanhado, o ambiente virtual 3D, nós temos o chat online para ajuda, temos no Discord, que também tem sido um sucesso, muita gente tem encontrado soluções lá ali para suas perguntas, né? E nós temos um time todo aí voltado, acompanhando esses canais, tanto o chat online quanto o canal do Discord, e uma outra equipe que tem postado nas nossas redes sociais e respondido e comentado. Então, continuem nos acompanhando. E, aproveitando, pedir que, se vocês estão postando fotos, nos marquem, usem a hashtag CSBC 2020 para que o registro desse evento único, né? Porque a gente está vivendo uma situação que inesperada, de pandemia, que não sabemos, se Deus quiser, que isso nunca mais aconteça. Então, é muito importante a gente deixar esse momento bem registrado aí nas nossas redes.
Nós temos também a hashtag CSBC 40 graus. Então, acho que tem essas duas hashtags aí para remeter que o congresso esse ano está sendo feito aqui diretamente da capital do Mato Grosso, Cuiabá. Então, 40 graus aqui, CSBC 40 graus, CSBC 2020, são as hashtags oficiais aí do nosso evento.
Bem lembrado, Sandro. Pedimos também que vocês façam uso do nosso filtro. Nós fizemos um filtro exclusivo do Congresso CSBC 2020. O filtro do Instagram, que também está disponível na área do foyer dos auditórios. Então, se você está ali andando pelo foyer dos auditórios, procurando, né, em qual sala você vai entrar, você encontra o filtro do Instagram ali. Então, faça sua foto, seu vídeo, usando o filtro e nos marque.
o template está disponível para os congressistas também, de fundo de tela?
Sim, os templates estão disponíveis na página do nosso congresso, no site oficial do CSBC 2020. Vocês encontram esses fundos que nós temos usado aí nas apresentações.
Maravilha, tá aí você, congressista, quando quer fazer bonito na faculdade, ó, já usa o nosso filtro, nosso template de fundo aí para fazer bonito na sala, viu? Ótima dica.
Bem, nós temos ainda hoje uma programação científica, cultural, temos mais 2 dias de muita programação, temos ainda algumas surpresas amanhã à noite, temos o encerramento na sexta-feira, temos ainda vários prêmios, brincadeiras que nós vamos, né, divulgar aos poucos aí, amanhã e sexta-feira. Então, a gente pede que vocês fiquem atentos às nossas chamadas, aqui ao vivo, nas redes sociais, por meio do e-mail, que vamos deixar vocês aí antenados do que está acontecendo por aqui. E é muito importante esse engajamento de vocês, mesmo à distância, porque com esse engajamento no canal do YouTube, comentando nas palestras, lá dentro do ambiente virtual 3D também, nas redes sociais, é isso que nos dá a sensação de presença, de estarmos todos juntos nesse momento. É isso, Sandro.
Obrigado, Eunice, pela brilhante participação aqui conosco. Dando continuidade ao nosso evento, eu gostaria de chamar a Luana, que está aqui no Zoom com a gente, está aqui de forma remota com a gente. Luana, é contigo aí.
Hello, everybody. I would like to ask Karim to take the word. So please, Karim.
Hi guys, everybody, boa tarde todo mundo. Como vocês puderam perceber, a gente terminou a parte gravada. Foi para a gente muito importante aqui na SBC que a gente fizesse esse painel internacional com legendas, com a possibilidade de ter libras, para que todo mundo pudesse acessar. A inclusão é um valor fundamental na SBC e é um valor que a gente quer, junto com a ética, passar para frente. Então, com isso, a gente vai fazer agora um fechamento desse painel. So, thanks everybody for joining us today for this absolutely first panel of many, I hope, on the ethics of AI. We had an absolutely stellar cast of stars to discuss with us this, which is a central topic to the society. So as you noticed, we recorded the panel beforehand so that we made sure that we had subtitles as well as sign language, so that it's accessible to all, so that it's reachable to all. Inclusion, diversity, and ethics are core values to our society, and that's what we made sure. But wanting to give a word now live to all of our fantastic panelists, I will now start the first round of closing remarks, and I will use the criteria of distance in relation to Cuiabá. So with that, I will start with Don, then we'll pass to Christina, and finally I will just read some words from Anthony, because he's in Australia. So this is the middle of the night for him, but he didn't want to leave us without a final word, and he just sent us a very nice message. So Don, can you please join us for your final words and experiences, and thank you for joining us. I think this will generate a very long tail and fantastic positive effects for our society.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about ethical issues. One of the things that has been of concern as we've talked through this is that we talk about law and ethics, and what we have to keep in mind is that ethics and law are distinct. Laws vary by city and county and state and country. Ethics, we are responsible for those people who we affect by what we do. So we make ethical decisions. I know that Anthony had said that, decisions have now changed and it's the computer who makes the decision. But when we program the automobile to pay attention to a certain level of distraction, it means that if a person walking across the street isn't a big enough level of distraction, we will run them over. And that decision as to what level the sensor will react to put on the brake is a human decision that we put into the software. We still are decision makers and have ethical responsibility. And the really tough job we have is to every line of code we write, every decision we make impacts others. It's an ethical decision. Be careful out there.
Thank you, Don. And now moving on, Christina, please, your final remarks. You're on mute.
Agora dá para ouvir, certo? Gostaria de agradecer a Karen por ter me convidado para participar desse painel com pessoas fantásticas que têm uma longa estrada nisso, Cristiano e Eunice por terem, na verdade, formulado, eu acho que todo o congresso está em torno disso, mas eu quero aqui deixar minhas palavras finais à sociedade. Então, eu acho, concordo com o Dom sobre a nossa responsabilidade, e eu quero aqui chamar a atenção da necessidade de incluirmos uma disciplina concreta sobre ética na nossa formação. E eu acho que até para nós refletirmos como seres humanos, desenvolvedores ou não de sistemas inteligentes ou sistemas convencionais, da nossa responsabilidade do que a gente está fazendo. E eu acho que nós temos pouca base nisso. Então, eu estou aqui no meu quest, né, para o desenvolvimento de uma disciplina obrigatória de ética, mas ética aqui, agora voltada para a parte de computação, e mais especificamente para a inteligência artificial, em que a gente sinta quais são os problemas. Não seja uma disciplina abstrata, mas uma disciplina que a gente entenda os efeitos de cada linha de código e mais os efeitos do nosso sistema quando implantado na sociedade, porque a gente está modificando a sociedade. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Cristina. Thank you, Cristina. And now I will read a few words from Anthony, who wanted us to convey the following message. Thank you to the Brazilian Computer Society and your president, Professor Macedo, for the opportunity to present at your 40th conference. The need to address AI and autonomous system challenges has increased in urgency as the adverse potential impact could be significant in specific critical domains. If not appropriately addressed, human trust will suffer, impacting on the adoption and the oversight, and in some cases, posing significant risks to humanity and to social values. From my presentation, it is clear that the values and issues outlined will benefit from much broader debate, research, and consultation. There are no definitive answers to some of the questions raised. As for many, it is a matter of perspectives and values. With these words, I would like to finalize this series of panels that we did around AI. We started talking about misinformation on Monday. We moved on to critical aspects around the education, which Christina just touched. So who is going to drive this agenda forward? How do we make sure that the next generations are well, strong, prepared? Closing with what Don has just mentioned, there is a significant difference between ethics and between law. And always remember that not because you can do something, you should. So ethics needs to be front and central. And finally, addressing what Anthony just left, his final words, remember that there are no definitive answers to those questions. We need to promote the debate, which I hope this is just a start. I hope this lives to become a very long tail, and that we continue the debate within our society, but also with our friends from abroad. So with that, I would like to thank Anthony, who will be hearing us later on the tape recording. I would like to thank Don for for being here. I would like to thank Christina and also our moderator, Professor Vigilio, who had to drop. I mean, he is in a place where it's inaccessible, unfortunately, today. Internet is just not as ubiquitous as we would like. And see you next year. Thank you. Bye.
Voltamos diretamente aqui dos estúdios da UFMT em Cuiabá. Vocês perceberam que nós fizemos um pequeno intervalo no nosso painel, mas foi de propósito, tá, Karen e Luana? Porque nós tínhamos alguns recados importantes para passar aos nossos congressistas e era essencial dar esses recados antes que eles saíssem do nosso auditório. Então, eu agradeço a condução do painel aí pela Karen Breitman e pela Luana Bugarelli e passo agora ao professor Cristiano para os agradecimentos finais.
Thanks, Karen, Luana, Don, Anthony, and Chris for this great and iconic panel. Thank you so much. E passo de volta a palavra para a professora Eunice para encerrarmos essa sessão. Bye, bye.
Bem, agora vocês fiquem com o intervalo dos nossos patrocinadores, porque sem a colaboração dos nossos patrocinadores, NIC-BR, CGI, Rio Tinto, Google e Log, não seria possível estarmos aqui hoje com toda essa estrutura para que vocês se sentissem presentes e imersos junto conosco no CSBC 2020. Então, tem um bom evento, temos daqui a pouco mais programação científica e mais à noite temos o nosso vernissage digital. Até mais.
Já imaginou se você não tivesse direito à liberdade de expressão respeitada? Se os dados particulares fossem dados sem autorização, ou se você tivesse sua navegação filtrada por causa de interesses comerciais. A liberdade de expressão, a privacidade e a neutralidade da rede são fundamentais para a internet. E esses são apenas alguns dos 10 princípios formulados pelo Comitê Gestor da Internet no Brasil. O CGI.br promove há mais de 20 anos a internet no país. Graças a ele, você tem constante inovação, segurança e diretrizes para o desenvolvimento da internet. Isso tudo é feito de forma colaborativa, transparente e democrática. O comitê é formado por representantes de todos os setores da sociedade. Assim, as decisões são tomadas por meio do diálogo, com a participação de todos os membros até que um consenso seja alcançado. Por esses e outros fatores, o modelo brasileiro de governança se tornou referência no mundo todo. CGI.br, por uma internet cada vez melhor no Brasil.
Quando você registra um domínio .br, você está contribuindo para a melhoria da internet no Brasil. Pois cada domínio que usa o .br é registrado pelo NIC.br, o Núcleo de Informação e Coordenação do .br, que além de registros de nomes de domínios, investe em análise e tratamento de incidentes de segurança, projetos de tecnologias de redes e operações, pesquisas que trazem indicadores sobre o uso das tecnologias da informação e comunicação, implementação de pontos de troca de tráfego local na internet, projetos que contribuem no desenvolvimento global da web e muito mais. Tudo isso porque o NIC.br é uma entidade civil de direito privado e sem fins lucrativos, que mantém uma estrutura de registro de domínio segura, estável e de confiança, e reverte parte do que você paga pelo seu domínio no desenvolvimento de infraestrutura, trazendo benefícios para todos que usam a internet no Brasil. Toda essa inovação, tecnologia de ponta, segurança e infraestrutura só é possível porque você tem um domínio .br. NIC.br, sempre em busca do melhor para a nossa internet.
Isso foi em torno do fim de 2004. Para vocês só terem uma ideia, Bertie, na época, já era uma pessoa conhecida nessa área que se chama de Information Retrieval, que é a área de ciência da computação, da qual sistemas de busca como a Google fazem parte. Claramente, isso era não apenas uma empresa interessante, mas um líder na empresa que tinha, obviamente, uma capacitação técnica que merecia a nossa atenção.
A gente chegou lá no escritório do Okuan e a gente teve a grata notícia, o Bertier só sentou e falou com a gente: olha, vocês estão demitidos da Okuan e segunda-feira vocês são funcionários do Google. Aí o mundo virou de cabeça para baixo. Né, assim.
E a Okuan, então, se transformou na Google Brasil, o primeiro escritório de engenharia da Google na América Latina.
Todo mundo tinha abertura para poder compartilhar suas opiniões e a gente, como um time, enfrentava essas dificuldades e essas questões de uma forma bem construtiva e interessante.
Então tinha uma cola muito forte lá. Eu acho que o Bertier tem uma importância fundamental nessa coesão. Eu acho que ficava muito claro que, apesar da escala ser diferente do que a gente estava começando a fazer no Google, tinha eco lá atrás, né, do que a gente fazia na Quad.
Hoje, o nosso escritório ele é muito reconhecido pela excelência técnica e pela qualidade das colaborações que a gente acaba construindo com outros times.
E eu acho que torna o grupo todo mais forte, no fim das contas.
Hoje eu paro e olho, eu vou chorar. Mas assim, nós fomos privilegiados de sermos escolhidos para participar do sonho do Bertier. A gente vai amadurecendo, esse sonho acaba virando nosso sonho também.
Eu tenho muito orgulho, né, do time de engenharia que a gente construiu, né? E esse é um time que tem uma reputação dentro da empresa. Nós temos uma reputação de ser um time de engenharia sólido.
Esse time no Brasil de engenharia é citado não por mim, mas por outros líderes de engenharia na Google mundialmente como um dos escritórios da Google mais produtivos.
A gente tem aqui no Brasil uma história fantástica. Das 9 plataformas do Google, que cada uma delas tem mais de 1 bilhão de pessoas, o Brasil é um top 5 market em todas elas. Que a gente possa ajudar a continuar a ter impacto, a continuar a construir uma sociedade melhor, a construir um Brasil mais eficiente, mais inclusivo, menos desigual e que as nossas plataformas sejam âncoras desse desenvolvimento.
Eu estou extremamente contente de poder fazer parte dessa celebração de 15 anos de tanto sucesso e desejando ao professor Bertier e ao nosso grupo da Google no Brasil ainda mais 15, 30, 100 anos de muito sucesso por aí.
Oh my God, you guys are gonna make me cry.
Chegou a hora dessa gente bronzeada mostrar seu valor. Eu fui à penha, fui pedir a padroeira para me ajudar. Salve o morro do Vintém.
Bora, bem a surpresa, obrigado.
Oh, samba, oh, samba, 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 samba.
A missão da Log é conectar o Brasil, entregando tudo para todo mundo em qualquer lugar, sejam elas entregas locais ou nacionais. Mas como fazer milhões de entregas por dia num país tão grande e diverso como o Brasil? Com tecnologia. Tecnologia é a nossa essência, desde modelos preditivos que otimizam a rede logística, a operação de alta rotatividade e capacidade dos nossos cross-dockings. Tudo é orquestrado por software. Nosso sistema Single Pass mede pacotes com precisão para achar o lugar ideal de transporte. E ao combiná-lo com nossos algoritmos estocásticos, são criadas rotas finais de alta densidade com um mínimo de operação manual. Os pacotes são ensacados na nossa menor unidade de entrega. E as rotas finais podem ser traçadas por diversos modais de transporte. Nossa rede de malha logística aérea ou rodoviária transfere a carga no mesmo dia, por todo o Brasil. até chegarmos em um dos nossos muitos centros de distribuição regionais, a última perna da sua entrega. Dali, um entregador parceiro da nossa enorme frota, com a ajuda do aplicativo e de machine learning, chegará ao destino final. Você. Log, conectando o Brasil.
Nosso dia a dia de professor, a gente ainda não sabe quanto tempo vai durar essa quarentena, mas a gente tem que fazer, de toda maneira, a nossa parte.
Por causa disso, nós vamos começar com um novo formato de aula, que agora é à distância.
Fiz todas as atividades, coloquei tudo dentro da sacolinha e os pais foram levando.
O professor já pode escrever aí no seu currículo que, além de ensinar, ele também é editor, youtuber.
Nós vamos aprender o sinal de escola. Casa, estudar. Como o sinal de escola.
O maior desafio na aula online é a falta do olho no olho.
Oi, tia Val, tudo bem? Aqui é o Leonardo. Eu tô muito saudade de você.
É tia Bia, aqui da minha casa. Vou estar ajudando vocês, aí na casa de vocês.
Eu tô morrendo de saudade. Nós, professoras, a gente tá morrendo de saudade de vocês. Eu não vejo a hora de ver vocês de novo todos bem.